This is a review of Memories of a Munchkin by Meinhard Rabi and Daniel Kinski. Meinhard Rabi, of course, played the Munchkin coroner in The Wizard of Oz, and his co-author, Daniel Kinski, is one of those guys who likes to take every possible opportunity to impress upon you that he was in the military. But apparently he also specializes in extracting oral histories from 100-year-olds, and even though Meinhard was not 100 years old when this book was written in 2005, I guess he's probably close enough, which actually makes me wonder how much of this book is actually written and directed by Meinhard Rabi versus being actually written by Daniel Kinski based on his interviews with Rabi, and then they've just decided to put Meinhard Rabi's name on the cover because obviously that's, good for marketing. But I don't know, that's just something to think about. Either way, the book is written from a first-person perspective. And so when I first found out about this book, I was immediately sort of skeptical and thinking, ho, here's a guy trying to leverage his involvement in that one film he was in once for 5 seconds 70 years ago to sell his autobiography. And it's definitely not without precedent. Plenty of Hollywood nobodies have used their involvement in one famous project to make a bit of money. But I'm so happy to report that I need not have worried, because that is not what this book is. The Wizard of Oz still remains the star of this book. So the first part obviously deals a lot with Meinhard Rabi's life and autobiography, and I was actually really surprised how much I ended up enjoying that, because that's not why I came to this book, for The Wizard of Oz, not for his autobiography, but I really did enjoy it. He has led a really full, unique, and often adventurous sort of life, but then also in terms of show business, he offers a really unique perspective because, let's not beat around the bush, he was in Hollywood in a time when there were not roles for the Peter Dinklages and Warwick Davises of the world, and is basically being employed in some sort of novel capacity. But even beyond that, just his involvement of being a performer without being a star, I think really helps this sort of book stand out from a typical show business autobiography. And then the majority of the book just sort of overflows with Wizard of Oz related stuff, which honestly I think is why we're all here, and it's fantastic. Now, I would not recommend this as sort of like the first making of Wizard of Oz book you read. I've reviewed quite a lot of the other ones, and I would recommend all of them before this one, not because this one is any worse, but because those other ones are very general and cover the sort of entire creation of the movie, whereas in a way this one is sort of more, like one man's perspective in a way. It's a bit more detailed and focused, but if you have read all those other Wizard of Oz books and you're still really wanting more, then this is absolutely something you're going to want to read. However, it is of course worth pointing out that if you've ever read any of those books or interviews or seen documentaries with the various cast and crew, you'll know that no two stories ever match up with when it comes to this movie. But I really didn't find like an unusual amount of discrepancies or anything more dubious than you'll see from other sources. And of course, if you're interested sort of specifically in the Munchkins in the movie, there are some other books that came out before this one, namely The Munchkins of Oz by Stephen Cox and The Munchkins Remember, The Wizard of Oz and Beyond by Stephen Cox, and then also Short and Sweet, The Life and Times of the Lollipop Munchkin, which is by Jerry Marin, who was also in the movie, and that book's very similar to this one in that it's sort of an autobiography on one of the Munchkins, except that one is not nearly as good as this, and definitely fits the sort of mold of someone trying to leverage their involvement in the film to sell what is primarily their autobiography. But of all those books, in my opinion, this one is by far the best. And so then we're going to talk about the visuals of this book, which are fantastic and lend this book a lot of strength to stand up alongside a lot of the other great Wizard of Oz books that have been produced over the years. In fact, I'll just read you this sentence from the introduction. Before we sat down to write Mr. Rabi's Munchkin memoir, we had noticed a disturbing pattern in biographies and autobiographies. Very few of them contained any pictures, and those that did were mostly black and white. That's something I completely agree with, and that's why, in my opinion, this is such a better book than any of the other Oz cast and crew biographies. So, of course, tons of the photos and posters and things you will have already seen in other books, but in terms of things unique to this book, one really great thing is that it showcases unpublished photos from Victor Fleming's collection. Victor Fleming, of course, was the primary director of The Wizard of Oz. And even though I think those photos have actually since been published, maybe they were part of the Blu-ray or part of the 70th anniversary book, the point is they were published in this book for the first time, which is great. And so in this section on marketing materials, you are going to see a lot of things you have seen in other books and elsewhere, but also a couple of things you won't have seen elsewhere that have been published in this book for the first time, which is something that might be of great interest to, if you're someone who collects film posters or memorabilia. Additionally, the captions for each image are fantastic. They tell you exactly what you're looking at and what it was used for. The only bad thing about this section is the layout is pretty atrocious, and this is the worst offender. Have a look at this. So what we're looking at here is a black and white photograph of an Al Hirschfeld watercolor that he created for the movie but was never actually used, and the original has since been lost, and this photograph is the only record of its existence and has been published in this book for the first time. It's the only place I've ever seen it, and so they decide to present it like this with parts of the image running into the center so you can't see it. Absolutely ridiculous. Things like this blow my mind, that people are able to get into publishing yet are still so clueless that they think things like this are a good idea. I mean, yes, if it had have just been on one page, the image would have been a bit smaller, but at least we'd be able to see the whole damn thing. 2-page spreads absolutely can be done and done to great effect, but examples like this are just unequivocally moronic. And then this last third of the book is an art section, which was so unexpected, but in my mind, it's what takes this book from being a really good book to being a really great book. So what's really wonderful about this art section is, unlike a lot of those posters and things that we've just seen that you will have no doubt already seen before, all of this art has been specially commissioned for this book. And they have chosen such an impressive roster of artists to make this sort of special celebration gallery of the movie, and specifically of the Munchkin coroner. Most of the artists included are of Mad Magazine fame, which I think is entirely appropriate because, in my mind, the de facto art style for The Wizard of Oz is caricature, thanks to the work that Al Hirschfeld did for the film's original promotional materials. And as is evident on the fantastic cover, he contributed to this book as well. But overall, it's really fantastic, despite the fact that, I guess in an intellectual sense, it doesn't really mesh well with what's come before. It kind of feels like two separate books in a way. But having said that, if this art section had have been its own book, I probably wouldn't have gone for it. Similarly, the book would have been a lot shorter and probably less impressive had it just been the stuff on the making of the movie and Meinhard Robbie's autobiography, but instead the book's being padded out by this art section in a really great way. And it's an example of how you can bring together two things that don't seem immediately connected to create a really great synergy. However, as much as I like this art section, there are two things that I abhor. One, you'll notice in maybe 5 or 6 of the images that this Lieutenant Navy guy, the co-author, has been inserted in the images, like painted in as a character, which is ridiculous. Makes no sense. Like when you're looking through, you say, oh, there's Dorothy and the coroner and Toto and the witch and the yellow brick road, and then there's just some guy standing in the background in a white naval uniform and cap, and it's like, was that guy in the movie? Did I miss something? Like if you saw the artwork without any context of like understanding that that's the book's co-author, you'd be like, what the hell? In fact, I knew that that was the book's co-author, and I was still like, what the hell? It's ridiculous. I mean, who does this guy think he is? I don't care if he's the guy who shot Osama bin Laden. What makes this guy think he is? It's somehow appropriate for him to be inserted into imagery celebrating one of the great pieces of art and entertainment of all time. It's ridiculous, it's jarring, and honestly ruins those artworks for me. And then second, Frank Frazetta. If you don't know Frank Frazetta's name, you will know his work. He's one of the great sci-fi fantasy artists of all time. And so when I saw his name given pride of place on the front cover, I thought, Frank Frazetta and Wizard of Oz, that sounds like the best pairing I never thought I'd see. And so this is Frank Frazetta's piece. What? Was he 10 years old when he drew this? I can't believe it. It's the worst piece in this book, and it's the worst piece of Frazetta work I've ever seen. I mean, if they didn't have enough money to commission a proper illustration, then they shouldn't have included him at all. It's not worth it being able to include his name and along with a list of artists in this book if that's the sort of thing you're going to put in the book. It's an insult to Frank Frazetta's work. It's an insult to The Wizard of Oz. It's an insult to this book, and it's an insult to the reader. Now, of course, I'm just making mountains out of molehills, although I do believe every word I say. But you should, of course, in no way let that sort of thing dissuade you from checking out this wonderful book or even adding it to your Wizard of Oz collection.
From now on, you'll be history.
You'll be his. You'll be his. You'll be his story.
And we will glorify